Hello, everyone. My name is Tamara Houston, and I'd like to welcome you to today's Water Resources Dashboard learning session on extreme events. This learning session will be recorded and placed on the Water Resources Dashboard as a button underneath the tool discussed today. The link to the dashboard will be provided at the end of this session. These learning sessions are being put on by a number of agencies, including, in alphabetical order, the American Planning Association, the American Water Works Association, the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, the Water Environment Federation, the Water Environment and Reuse Foundation, and the Water Research Foundation. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before, my name is Tamara Houston. I work at the National Centers for Environmental Information within NOAA, and I will be moderating today's session. Next slide. Before we get started, let's review a few housekeeping items. We've taken a screenshot to show you an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this in the upper right corner of your own computer desktop. You've joined today's presentation listening through your computer's speaker system by default. If you prefer to listen through your telephone, locate the audio box in the web controls and select Use Telephone. The dial-in information and access code will then appear. You can send questions to our speaker at any time using your questions pane. Simply type in your question and click Send. At the end of the presentation, we will take as many questions as possible. These will be read by Erica Brown, who will be joined by Miko McFeely, who are both from the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk very briefly about the Water Resources Dashboard. Then we will look at extreme event resources, and Jake Crouch from NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information will be presenting. And then following the presentation, we will open the floor for any questions. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. First, I want to talk very briefly about the Water Resources Dashboard. The dashboard is a result of the partners mentioned before and the EPA doing a joint study on water utilities and extreme events. There were two findings that came from that study that are relevant to today's discussion. The first finding is that many utilities said that they had difficulties finding in one location the water information that they were looking for. Therefore, this water dashboard was developed to pull together weather, climate, and water information into one location. The second ask from this community was that some of the information presented is new to them, so that they would like to be educated on the data, information, and tools that are available. Therefore, once the water dashboard was released on March 22nd of 2016, we began developing this learning series to address this need. Next slide, please. Our speaker for today is Jake Crouch. Jake is a West Virginia native who moved to Asheville, North Carolina in 2003 to attend the University of North Carolina, Asheville, majoring in atmospheric sciences. While a student, he began an internship at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, or NCEI, in June of 2005. Jake graduated in 2007 and attended graduate school at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he earned his Master of Science degree in meteorology in 2009. Jake returned to NCEI and Asheville in September of that year. He currently works in the Weather Science branch and is the lead author of the monthly U.S. Climate Report. Jake, it's all yours.
All right, thanks, Tammy. So the first slide that I'm showing here is how to access the National Centers for Environmental Information Extremes tool, extreme web pages from the Water Resource Dashboard. Once you click on the link from the dashboard, it brings you to this web page from NCEI. This is a landing page that you can access all of our extreme events information from the single landing page. And today I'm going to be talking and do a deep dive on 2 of these products, and at the end I will provide a brief description of all of the products that are provided through this service. The first tool I'm going to talk about today is our U.S. Records tool. This tool is a way to query station-level data to look for daily, monthly, and all-time temperature and precipitation extremes across the United States. This includes areas outside of the contiguous United States, such as Puerto Rico, the U.S. affiliate of Pacific Islands, Alaska, and Hawaii. So if you click on the U.S. Records link on this page, it'll bring you to this landing page that describes the information that goes into this particular tool. And it also gives a table describing records across the U.S. over the past several time scales. The first table shows U.S. daily records. So these are station-level records that set a record for a day. So, for example, if here in Asheville, if we set an all-time, we set a daily precipitation record today, that would show up as a count of 1 on this table. I'm going to highlight here in red the precipitation records. So, looking at the last, so the first table here shows daily records. The second table shows monthly records. So if that daily record was an all-time record for the month, it will show up in the second table. You can also see different time scales that records were set for. So the first is the last 7 days. So I pulled this table 3 days ago. So as of April 9th, the last 7 days, there were 398 U.S. stations that broke or tied daily precipitation records. Of those 398 daily precipitation records, 5 of them were all-time highs for the month of April. We also provided that information back for the past 30 days, past 365 days, month to date. So the month to date would be the values set from April 1st through April 9th when I copied this web page. These values will be higher if you look today, and also the year to date. Looking once again, we can provide the same information for the monthly records and for the month to date. So this information is useful if you're wondering how or if a recent precipitation total for your location set a new record. The information in this web page takes about 3 days from the time of observation to be displayed here. Most of these observations are coming from the National Weather Service, and it takes about 48 to 72 hours for that information to propagate into our archive here at NCEI and be displayed through this web tool. At the top of this web page, so the first tab I was just showing the record summary, so that which gives those tables to give national summaries. If you select the right tab, if you view selected records, you can search for data for specific regions, states, specific dates, and specific parameters. So if you're looking for temperature records or precipitation records in this case, you can select those values. So here I've selected daily records. You can also select monthly or all-time records. I've set the parameter as highest precipitation. You can also look for temperature, snowfall, and snow depth. And then I've set the date as March 31st, 2007. So what this is showing here, each dot on the map below shows a location that set a daily precipitation record for March 31st across the U.S. If I want to look for a specific location, so in this example, I still have the daily records precipitation and the March 31st value selected, and I want to look at North Carolina since I live in North Carolina. How many of those precipitation records were set in the state? And each of the dots on the map there indicate locations in North Carolina that set precipitation records on this date. If you scroll down on this same page, you can see we provide the information in a table so you can see how these records panned out. The table for each of the stations within North Carolina that set records for this date, what the record was, when the previous record occurred, what the previous record was, and how many years we have data for that location. So for example here, I've highlighted Hendersonville, North Carolina. My in-laws live in Hendersonville, so I thought it was an interesting record. On March 31st, they set a precipitation record of 3.48 inches. And this beat the previous record, which was set in 1962, and that previous record was 1.49 inches of precipitation. So this just shows an example of how you can dig deeper into this data to get specific information for locations you might be interested in. Moving back now to look at one of our other extremes products, the U.S. billion-dollar weather and climate disasters. This is a way that we try to tie a weather and climate phenomenon to the commerce and economics here in the United States. This tool is updated quarterly here in the U.S. So we've updated the information for the first quarter of 2017 last week. And I've highlighted here where that link is on that web page. Once you click on that link, we provide an overview of the information, what goes into this specific tool, and the types of phenomenon that are tracked. The first tab here on the left I'm going to click on is mapping. So this is a way to look at a spatial representation of these disasters that have exceeded $1 billion in losses. And you can select here of all the different disaster types, and I've selected flooding. And I've shown here all disasters from 1980 through 2017. And then the map here shows which states have been impacted the most by flooding events that have had losses exceeding $1 billion across the U.S. And then the map indicating, showing where those disasters have occurred in the past. And using your mouse, you can hover over any state to see how many of these events have occurred. So for example here, I've highlighted Louisiana. So from 1980 through 2017, the state of Louisiana has had 7 flooding events that have had losses exceeding $1 billion in damages. Another way of looking at this, on the drop-down menu there, I've selected cost. So you can look at the number of events per state, or you can look at how much those events have cost and damages across the state. And once again, a spatial representation of those events. We can see that several states kind of pop out in terms of high loss due to flooding. California, Texas, Louisiana, and Iowa pop out to me, but there are others as well. If you want to look at information for a specific state, if you can click on the map on any of the states, and it'll bring you to a table that describes what those billion-dollar events were, when they occurred, and it gives then a summary of what losses were experienced, as well as what meteorological conditions led to that specific event. For example, here I've shown Colorado. They've had 2 billion-dollar weather disasters related to flooding since 1980. One occurred in May 2015, and the other occurred in September of 2013. It gives a little more information there, and you can also click on the event, and it will give you more details on the specifics. Going back to the top left, showing looking at a time series, so we can look at how many flooding events have had losses exceeding $1 billion back to 1980. And this just shows how the number of these events have changed with time. And the time series here shows that we did have a peak in billion-dollar weather events related to flooding in 2016, when we had 4 such events impact the U.S. Next, looking at the summary stats link there on the left, if you just want to get an overview of what types of disasters, billion-dollar weather disasters, have impacted the U.S. since 1980, and how they break down in terms of their frequency, how many there were, and how much they cost, this table gives an overview of those types of statistics. Here I've highlighted flooding. So since 1980, we've had 27 events across the U.S. that have caused at least $1 billion in damages. And if we adjust for inflation, that's $1.14 trillion of damages here in the U.S. related to flooding since 1980. And then once again, a table of events specific for Louisiana. So those are the two products I'm going to do a deep dive on today, and I'm going to go through some of these other products and offer a brief overview of what they do and the type of information they provide. Here, the Climate Extremes Index. This is an index that looks at the spatial extent of extremes across the U.S., both temperature and precipitation. This is more of a computationally intensive tool that tries to mathematically describe changes in extreme events here in the U.S. Scrolling down further on that page, so this is the landing extreme events page on the NCEI website. We have the National and State Climate Extremes Committee. What these two separate bodies do is they look at precipitation as well as temperature and other phenomenon and try to determine if those values set either a new national record or a new statewide record. So for example, if Shreveport, Louisiana received 24 inches of precipitation in a single day, this State Climate Extremes Committee would examine to see if that specific event was a new record for the state as a whole. And these ad hoc committees meet to adjudicate those types of records. And that information is provided through these links. Our U.S. climate extremes, this tool shows you extreme climates in the U.S. So you can look at top 10 sunniest locations, top 10 cloudiest locations, top 10 wettest locations, and those can all be accessed to this link. The special report on climate extreme events, this is a legacy product here at NCEI, but we still make the information available. That does a deep dive into specific large-scale events that have impacted the U.S., and several flooding events are included in this analysis. And Global Hazards is another defunct product here at NCEI, but we still provide information and links to the previous, to the old legacy products. So Global Hazards looks at international hazards and climate extremes and tries to describe both meteorologically and economically impacts of extreme weather across the world. Ivy Tracks is our International Best Track Archive and Climate Stewardship tool. This is an international tool that examines tropical cyclone information for all basins, including the East Pacific and North Atlantic, which are pertinent to us here in the U.S. Drought monitoring is a big part of what we do here at NCEI, and we have a lot of products included in this suite, and that information is available through this link. Our tornado climatology tool provides a historical perspective of tornado activity across the U.S. The information is broken down on a statewide and national level and examines both trends and looks at long-term means in terms of tornado activity. Further down the page to wrap up, we do have our regional snowfall and northeast snowfall impact scale and indices. These two products try to determine the societal impacts of snowfall, in particular across the U.S., by looking at snowfall's impacts on population centers. Our severe weather data link, several different tools are available here, including our storm events database, which looks at reports of severe weather, including flooding events across the U.S., and our severe weather data inventory, which does a similar, is another way of looking at severe weather across the U.S. And provides information to historical data. And then lastly, our North American Climate Extremes Monitoring is a tool that looks at station-level climate extremes across both the contiguous U.S., Alaska, Canada, and Mexico. That is all of the material that I have prepared, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Well, thank you, Jake. At this point, we are going to open it up for questions. You can use the questions pane in your web controls on the right of your screen. Simply type in your question and click send. And Erica Brown from AMWA will read them out. Erica?
Thanks, Tammy. So we have a question to start, and the question is, on the U.S. records summary, what are the records compared to? In other words, how far back do we have records data for in terms of daily and monthly precipitation? And does this vary based on location?
Yes, it does vary on location. So for that example I showed for Hendersonville, North Carolina, that particular station had data back over 100 years. So that is looking at the entire period of record for that particular location. I believe that the tool, I might be incorrect, but I believe that the tool only allows you to access the records back to the year 2000. But we do have all of the underlying information here available at NCEI. And it does vary depending on the number of years at each location. I believe for a station to be included in that particular tool, it has to have at least 30 years of data. So if there's a new station that comes online, it's obviously going to break records more frequently. And so we use that 30-year threshold to kind of weed those out. But yes, so the longer-term stations will have more years of data that it's being compared to.
Great. We have another question. What does the billion-dollar flooding cost measure include or not include in terms of damage to roadways or water infrastructure or other kinds of economic or agricultural losses or all of the above?
I believe that the answer is all of the above. There is, on the billion-dollar weather disaster page, there is a very descriptive detail about what is included. I know infrastructure, agriculture, personal loss, so a house, for example, being flooded, business loss, so a Walmart being flooded, all of those are included in this particular tool. So it's mostly looking at insured losses. There is a factor that is taken into account for non-insured losses. And so if a water system is flooded and damaged in the U.S. and it is insured, it is likely included in this particular tool.
Great, thanks. We have time, I think, for one or two more questions if there are others. All right, Tammy, I see one more here. It says, is there a way to compare the all-time precipitation records data with the billion-dollar flooding disasters map online?
We don't have an integrated way to do that right now. You know, it's obviously both of those tools are available online, and our users are free to do that intercomparison on their own. In the billion-dollar weather disasters, it does provide a link to a more detailed description of each event, and depending on the event, it is likely included an analysis of those all-time precipitation records that were broken. And in terms of more information on the flooding events, the storm events database, which I didn't include today, but will be talked about in the future, does provide additional detail in terms of records and impacts from particular flooding events.
Great, thanks, Jake. Tammy, it looks like that's all the questions that we've had come in.
Great, thank you. So go ahead and move to the next slide, please. Okay, we do want to thank Erica and Miko from AMWA for hosting today's learning session, and thanks to Jake for his presentation. Next slide, please. The last slide provides links to the Water Resources Dashboard for your reference. We will hold additional learning sessions in the near future, so be on the lookout for those announcements. And thank you all for joining us for today's learning session. Have a great afternoon.